Hello, we're live. It's a brand new streaming space. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Just checking the levels and everything as we get started. Just let me know in the chat if you can hear me. I think I'm good to go. Also gives me a good idea of what the delay between the stream and the chat is in the new streaming setup here in beautiful downtown Nicusp. Hello, everyone. All right, audio is working. That means we're working. Good evening. Welcome to summer, everyone. It is seriously 25 degrees outside right now. And it's about 30 degrees in here. So, perfect sweater weather. But, in the meantime, my name is Kyle Kush. I'm the archive technician at the Air Lakes Historical Society, and welcome to The Secret Show. Yes, this is Street Signs and Sine Waves. This was a show that we had originally put on as a test of some Zoom streaming equipment for our members back in October. And it seemed to go all right, but of course, we really want to have everybody be able to see the show, and we want to have it archived forever in proper high def on YouTube. So that is the show that we are bringing you tonight. So I do want to acknowledge that the original funding for the streaming equipment and some of our COVID provisions back in October when we first did the show was provided by Columbia Basin Trust. And I also want to acknowledge, of course, that we are on the traditional territory of the Sinaiaks people. And I am very happy to be in these pretty swank new streaming studio here. The server here is pretty amazing. Hello, Tamara. It's quite a large deal. It actually, feels like something you'd see at a at a tech firm somewhere. It's actually that large. My computer that I'm streaming on today is liquid cooled. So it's pulling some pretty heavy-duty tasks. Of course, when you're streaming from a place like Nicusp, to be able to get these streaming speeds is pretty amazing, and you need some pretty amazing equipment. So thank you to Ron and Sean and Janice and Cedra and everyone involved who has helped set this up. So I just want to acknowledge their hard work, and I can't wait to see how this project develops. But more on that in the months to come. Right now, we've got a slideshow to start. So here it is, Street Signs and Sine Waves. Sine waves, just some sort of technological vaguely technological term I can tie into new technology. And that sound you hear is our socially distanced audience arriving. So pretty much perfect timing as we get going here with our first segment. I finally finished last year, after about 8 years, digitizing all of Milton Parent's negatives that he had collected or taken over the years, his 30-plus years of research, and documenting the history of the region. And the final count of his photo collection was 10,313. That makes up about a quarter of our photos that he personally either took or copied from other people. So I just wanted to show you a few of those here today. Of course, Milton, for many years, was on the board of Nicusp Music Fest, which was a pretty big deal here for the 8 years that it operated. And here's an aerial view of Music Fest and the rec grounds. This is the 2007 edition, and that's just a lot of people. The grounds held about 16 to 1,800 people at any one time, and you can see the 2 stages on top of Helen Zelsnick Park there. And that's the view from the stage. And who knows if you'll be able to recognize any of those people in the crowd. And, but yeah, it was quite a happening event. Not performing at Music Fest was Milton himself. As we can see here in this vacation photo that somehow wound up in the archives collection. Of course, Milton not only had his own dark room, he was a very, very skilled jazz musician, and his love of jazz meant that he took some photos of jazz concerts that he went to. Such as this. This is a set of his negatives. All that it said was jazz concert, Qualicum, November 76. And it's like, okay, interesting. It doesn't have anything to do with the cusp, but of course it's mixed in with all the negatives. So you just wind up developing them all anyway, because they come in these big long strips. And it's like, wish I could tell who any of these people were, but, these are some pretty great shots. And then I get to this shot, and I see a vibraphone. And there are not a whole lot of famous vibraphonists. And I quickly realized, wow, this is Lionel Hampton. He's like a Hall of Fame jazz musician. And he's playing in Qualicum Beach in November 76. And then I remembered, well, Lionel Hampton actually moved to the Pacific Northwest in the 60s. And there's actually a Lionel Hampton Jazz Fest, I think, down in Idaho still. So, yeah, there we go. The legendary Lionel Hampton in concert as captured in Milton Parent's negatives. Just some really cool shots. A pretty bare bones drum kit by modern standards, but I don't think that hall could hold much more. Of course, in our collection, Milton is most known for taking scenic photos, such as Kimball Lake, or as Rosemary Parent will be sure to tell you, Kemball Lake. The corrupted spelling Kimball arose sometime in the 40s or 50s, and it actually became the legal name of the lake. And even though it's named after Kemball, if you go to Caslow and you have the Kemball building, it's the same guy. It's named after him. But along the way it just got corrupted into Kimball, and that's what its legal name is. Although I'm sure Rosemary would appreciate it if one day somebody got on that. Like I said, he didn't. Most of the collection that he in his negatives are not his own photos, but he refused to take other people's photos. He didn't want to lose them or have them outside of people's possession. He actually took photos of their photos and then redeveloped those in his own private darkroom. So this is actually a photo of a postcard. In this case, it's the legendary Newmarket Hotel in downtown New Denver. This is the hotel that burned down in 1974. But yeah, that's Newmarket Hotel, Main Street, New Denver. I love how it just says Glacier in background. Yes, that would be Denver Glacier. This is a great shot. Here's a running race in down along Front Street, which was the main street of downtown Arrowhead, right in front of the Union Hotel. which was there right until the end of Arrowhead in 1968. But that is probably July 1st or maybe Victoria Day. A great casual shot. We'll get into some more casual shots later, but here you have 4 members of the Nakusp baseball team smoking on the deck of the SS Minto. And this came from the late Wendy Obiashi. If anybody could give me some names on these photos, just drop me a line at the archives. I think that's what I'll have to do one day, is just do a little, either via Facebook or somehow start developing a database of photos where we're trying to get people identified, because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos where the photos themselves are great, but they'd be even better if we knew who the people were. So, again, your lesson, especially this day and age with digital photos, keep track of who's in the photos. Fortunately, this one's easy to track down because there weren't too many roadside pop stands in the 1920s in the West Kootenay, and there weren't too many buses in the West Kootenay in 1927. So we know exactly who this is and where it was. This is the Pop Inn at Beasley, in between South Slocan and Nelson, on the what would eventually become Highway 3A/6. And as you can see, ice cold pop right off the shelf. And that would be Ched Clark, who ran the Clark and Motherwell freight and bus lines throughout the West Kootenay. When I first saw this photo, I thought it was like a first aid course or something, until I realized, she's not giving CPR. This is a high school graduation initiation at the Green Door, which of course was right across from the high school. So some sort of drinking ritual here. Again, I don't know most of these people offhand, but I can guess a couple. One in the glasses there is Linda Baird, because I pointed this out to her sister Sharon, who's one of our dedicated volunteers, and she goes, "Oh, that's my sister." So yeah, this would be turn of the 60s or so, maybe late 50s. This is a great shot of the Nakusp Hot Springs as it nears completion. And of course, it's such a wonderful amphitheater style building. That wonderful half circle that made it was part of the village logo for many, many years. And of course, it's all wood too, which is pretty important for around here. And even not finished, it looks pretty cool from the outside. Here's what it looked like in the inside as it was nearing completion. You can actually picture yourself in the lobby right here. You know exactly where this is. This is the front desk as you come in, and you're taking the photo basically right from the entrance to the dressing rooms. And you can see the bathrooms under construction in the back. This is a great panoramic shot. So this is 5 photos stitched together. Or should I actually say taped together. As the pool's near completion. Ruminate on that for a second. And those aren't the only construction photos of hot springs in Milton's collection. Here's Halcyon Hot Springs, the new Halcyon Hot Springs, under construction in 1998. And you see how much work went into the shape of the pools. Instead of the circular amphitheater, you have all these curves and bends, and of course the lazy river in the main pool, the swimming pool down below. And so just a amazing multi-million-dollar piece of construction. Here's the inside of what would become the main lodge building at Halcyon. And everybody inside. And when they were finished, or close to finish, they look like this. Here they are. All the tiling and the pools are complete, and now they are just constructing the railing. This is February '99. And here it is the next month, all finished, and the first bathers in Halcyon Hot Springs. Milton actually, believe it or not, did a tiny little bit of architecture. Namely, the original version of our visitor center building in 1986. He actually designed the front of the building to make it look like a stern-wheeler. This building was originally an outbuilding at Summit Lake Ski Hill. And it was transported downtown to its modern location in 1986. The paddle wheel was built as part of the building. Now, the building itself was re-renovated and completely reoriented and expanded in 2003, the winter of 2003. But the paddle itself was a real paddle wheel. It came from the beach at Comoplex. It's the paddle wheel of the SS Revelstoke. Even though the sign on the front of the visitor center said Minto, because that was our most famous and longest served ship, the actual paddle came from the SS Revelstoke, which burned along with the town of Comoplex in 1973. They extracted the paddle, but the boiler is still there, embedded in the beach. There's Milton's brother Len standing on top of it in 1973. And this next shot is Bill Barrow posing with it 26 years later, April 1999. And that's pretty much how it looks like today. A bit more sand built along it, but it is embedded right in. That will be forever a feature of the waterfront at Comoplex until it eventually rusts away. Of course, lots of historic photos in those negatives. This is a great shot of Robson, and this comes to us through Milton's collection via Bruce Rohn. And as you can see, this is right at the beginning of Robson. Robson's only about 15, 18 years here. And you can see the orchards. People who weren't here before the dam, I don't think can fathom just how many orchards were along Lower Arrow Lake, Renata, Deer Park, and Robson. But a great shot of early Robson. Go down the river, the Columbia River, a few kilometers to Castlegar, and there you see the Waldy Mill, which a lot of lumber in the cusp would have fed into, and a lot of lumber in Edgewood would have filled to, as the Waldys actually built the flume that went from Watcham Lake into Lower Arrow Lake. You can see the original railway bridge coming into Castlegar, and way in the background you can see the ferry. Of course, Bruce comes from Renata, and this is a great bird's eye view shot of Renata in 1920s. And again, Renata exported tons and tons of fruit every year, and that's a great shot. You can see the entire village is orchards. Nowadays, the people that live at Renata or summer at Renata, their homes are on the bench above this parcel of land, which was flooded with the High Arrow Dam. But we'll get to that at the end of the show as we get closer to our virtual field trip. Renata, primarily settled by Mennonites, which was rare for the Kootenays. But while it was the one settlement that lasted, there was another Mennonite settlement that was founded in the vicinity of Lower Arrow Lake. And that, if you've ever driven, well, of course you have, as you make the switchback past Needles on the way to Edgewood and you see Watchan Settlement Road, that settlement they are talking about is the village of Karstens, which existed along what is now Watchan Settlement Lake Road between 1911 and 1917. And here is a house being towed into the village. The Watchan settlement didn't last very long. The people of the village bought land sight unseen and then arrived after. So once they arrived, they saw that the soil was pretty poor, not too great for orcharding. And so by the end of the First World War, it had been abandoned. Although there were a couple of prominent people in that community, namely Reuben Berge and Walter Isaacs, who did wind up sticking around in the valley. There's not much left of it today, but there is a small cemetery with a couple of graves in it. This is from Historical Society field trip, speaking of field trips, back in 2007, where you see the graves of Barbara Krebs and Elizabeth Lieb. And this is tucked away on private property, way in the forest, so it's a... But, as you can see... this is an interesting shot. Please don't cut me down. Grandmother planted me in 1912. I was only 4 feet tall and 1 inch thick. The P.H. Weed family. So Mrs. Cornelius Taves, who was a former resident of Karstens, planted this tree on her farm, what was then her farm, in 1912. And this is how it looked like in 2007. As you can see, the termites had gotten to the signs, so they had to put another sign, which has also since been eaten away by termites. But what's cool is that that's not the first picture of this tree that we have in our collection. This is how the original sign looked in 1970. And this is out of the Marvel Milne collection. So it's very neat when different people's collections sort of harmonize like that. Where there's always new things coming into the archives. So I thought I'd give you just a little bit of miscellaneous items here in our next section. In last month's show, I showed you a picture of Devlin Ferry Service Station at Fauquier, surrounded by floodwaters. Well, here's another shot of it surrounded by floodwaters. This is from the 61 flood. And it's interesting because it's one of the few full-color shots we have of the service station, complete with the Pepsi billboard on the sign, and you have the then new-style gas pumps in front. Highway 6 is what's flooded right in front of it, and you can see the end of the Needles Fauquier ferry at the left. This is a cool shot from the Grace Mackey collection. Grace Mackey, for 40 years, was the postmistress at Sidmouth. So when the post office was founded in 1927, Hall's Landing, so to explain where Sidmouth is, on your way to Revelstoke, just north of Shelter Bay, you may have seen that new development going in, and then you see Sidmouth Road leads into that development. If you go down to the modern lakeshore below that development, that is the area of Sidmouth. And Sidmouth was not a concerted village as much as it was a large area of farms spread out over a number of kilometers. But that's about where the core of Sidmouth, the ferry, the store, the post office, and the school were. down below that settlement. Hall's Landing was just to the south of that, and Hall's Landing was where the Columbia River entered the Upper Arrow Lake north of Shelter Bay. So here they are moving a farm building to become the Sidmouth Post Office. And there's Mrs. Mackey there. These photos are 39 years apart. There she is, the original post office. And there she is 40 years later, right the year before the post office closes. A crazy, a very interesting photo. Again, you don't see too many out of... we don't usually keep photos that aren't specifically within the Arrow Lakes, but this is actually out of a photo album. This is out of the Jim Vipond photo album. Vipond, a very prominent family and early in the cusp. And a lot of these albums are either taken by Mr. Vipond or they were taken by Mr. Allen, who was the bank manager here in the 30s and early 40s. I used a lot of his slides in the Hour-Colored Passbook. This is the Doukhobor-owned Kootenai Columbia Preserving Works Jam Factory at Brilliant, just across the river from Castlegar, where the Brilliant Cultural Center is. Today is where the Jam Factory was, and I do want to point out that, speaking of the Jam Factory and Doukhobor-run business operations, our own Greg Nestoroff has an awesome new article on his website, the Kootenai Reader, that you should go and check out, and it talks about the history of Groman Narrows and how it was tied to the Doukhobor jam business, and how Groman Narrows Provincial Park came to be. So again, Kootenai Reader. Kutne. Another Doukhobor related photo from that same album is this one. This is the last message of Peter Lordley Verrigan, as read by his grandson, John J. Verrigan. This is 1939, 1940, and just look at the mass of people gathered to hear this message. This is an awesome shot of Monday McRae and Alex McRae dancing on the Gerard Bridge, the old Gerard Bridge at Gerard, crossing the Lardo River. Again, just one of those fantastic casual shots. There have been a couple of versions of this bridge since, but it's still the same stretch of road that you cross south end of the Lardo River at the south end of Trout Lake on, as you head towards Poplar Creek and Meadow Creek. And there's the original truss bridge at Gerard, so another version of that bridge. And of course, this was just all refurbished, refitted about 5 years ago, end of 2015. A great shot of the Quanson Carlson mill crew in the cusp in the early 1910s. And the Quanson Carlson mill was located basically right on top of where the public wharf and marina are today. And what may be surprising to people born here after the 1930s, which would be, I would say, the great majority of you watching this, is the number of Sikh people in the mill crew. We had a decently sized South Asian community here in the 1900s and 1910s, all working largely in forestry. Not just here, but also in Comaplex. A couple dozen, which is quite a lot of the population by the standards of that time, in the cusp. So our ethnic diversity sometimes gets lost in history, unfortunately, but there was absolutely a substantial South Asian Punjabi populace here in the early 20th century. Another shot of the mill crew here. And you see these mill photos pop up in different people's collections. This is from the Walter Nelson collection, so probably would have come from his father, John Nelson, the longest-lived resident of Galena Bay. This is the Arrow Lakes Lumber Company mill crew at Arrowhead, taken around the same time as the other photos. This was one of the larger mills on the lake. This is a fun shot of Bill Barrow, who many of you remember. This is him as a child when he was the Nakusp hockey team mascot in 1939 or thereabouts. So so if 1939, he'd be 9 years old in this photo. And of course, the Nakusp hockey jersey there, that hockey sweater, back when they really truly were sweaters. That's an important shot because there is the exact same sweater as it looks now. And this is the sweater that now hangs in the Nakusp Arena. Of course, the moths got to it a bit over the years, but the color is still quite vibrant in it. And it's cool that people are smart enough to hang on to artifacts like that for all these years. Milton Parent wasn't the only Milton in our collection with some great photos. We actually, thanks to Ian Fraser of Caslow, were fortunate enough to acquire hundreds of slides from the Milton Goddard collection. Milton Goddard was the regional manager for BC Parks in the Kootenays for many, many years. And so he traveled all around British Columbia and was smart enough to snap some pretty gorgeous photos. So let's take you through some of these awesome scenic photos. We start here. This is the summit of Mount Garibaldi, just outside of Squamish. There is no Whistler yet. This is about 10 years before Whistler even exists. But what a stunning view. Another famous provincial park in the Lower Mainland is Mount Seymour, famous, of course, for its ski area. These are some skiers enjoying a little day out on the slopes, Mount Seymour ski area, and this is probably the Bunny Hill, judging by the poses of some of these skiers. Here's Barkerville in 1961. This is 3 years after Barkerville becomes a provincial park. As you can see, it's still pretty much in its actual ghost town state here. Not the more tourist-oriented ghost town it was on its way to becoming. The streets are still pretty grassy and not a lot of paint up yet. So this is, but yet, you do see the first tourists coming into the town and getting Barkerville going again here, as you can see people walking the streets. So if you've been to Barkerville, you'll recognize some of these buildings. There's the Barkerville Fire Hall. There's the Barkerville Museum and Kelly's General Store. If you like those awesome giant jawbreakers that are the size of your fist. But yeah, all pretty cool to see these same buildings that we know so well from a tourist standpoint somewhat closer to the original state. Although there's already been some amount of restoration here as they save all of these cool old buildings by the time those photos are taken. This is an interesting shot. This is Highway 20 east of, or west of Williams Lake on the way to Risky Creek and Alexis Creek and that direction. So this is where it crosses the Fraser River, and you can see the original Chilcotin Bridge and the brand new Chilcotin Bridge on top, August 1961, and that's still the same bridge you cross today. So again, it's interesting to see the contrasts. Some more great mountain scenery shots. There's lots of glacial shots in the Milton Goddard collection. This is much further along Highway 20 as you keep going from Risky Creek to Guinea, past Anaham Lake, and into Tweedsmuir Provincial Park. This is Panorama Ridge. This is Hunland Falls on Hunland Creek, and again, even though it's in British Columbia, most of us have never seen these locations. It's so close, it's so remote. This is the Lake of the Hanging Glacier, which is in the Purcell Mountains west of Invermere. Commander Mountain, Commander Glacier. So this is in Bugaboo Provincial Park. And of course, in the 60s, that's when the brand new alignment of the Trans-Canada Highway was built through the Rogers Pass. So here are BC Parks employees touring the brand new Rogers Pass Summit Monument, and that we all know so well as we drive to Calgary. There it is, brand new. You can even tell by the varnish on the monument. This is a great shot. Yes, there are some shots of the Arrow Lakes in the Milton Goddard collection, and this is one of them. This is an alternate version of a photo that I used in the Our Colored Passbook. This is Sutherland Falls, Blanket Creek. Today, we know these falls as part of Blanket Creek Provincial Park, but back then, this is just the waterfalls just outside the settlement of 12 Mile, which was Blanket Creek Provincial Park is basically on the north edge of what was the town of, or community of 12 Mile, and more on that in a few slides. Speaking of brand new highways through mountain passes, in 1963 the Salmo-Creston Highway was opened, the new alignment of Highway 3 through the Selkirk Mountains, and so there, alongside the brand new highway, a brand new provincial park called Stagleap Provincial Park was established. And there, inside this brand new provincial park is the brand new highway. And that provincial park was given its name and primarily established in part to help protect mountain caribou, as well as deer, hence the name Stagleap. But sadly, this herd of mountain caribou no longer exists. This is the South Selkirk mountain caribou herd. And of course, a lot going on here now in the cusp to try and save mountain caribou. But sadly, this particular herd that you see here in the photo was not able to survive the 21st century. Lots of photos of Mount Assiniboine, which of course is one of the more famous mountain parks in the Rocky Mountains. This is on the trail between Simpson River and Magog Lake, and Mount Assiniboine may be famous perhaps other than, obviously for the actual mountain, but its lodge, Mount Assiniboine Lodge, and this is a great bird's eye view of the lodge complex in this amazing alpine meadow setting. And of course, it's you have to hike to get there. There's no roads into Mount Assiniboine Provincial Park. Bordering Banff Park, you can actually hike in from Sunshine Meadows, or Sunshine Village, which is right on the border with British Columbia. You just hike in from the ski hill. Or you can ride your horse in. Here's a little lunch stop at Rock Isle Lake in Mount Assiniboine Provincial Park. And there's Faro Pass. This is the great, I love this, the Houndstooth, one of the more distinctive mountain features in the Kootenays. Again, this is in Bugaboo Provincial Park in the Purcell Mountains, west of Svilmachine, northwest of Invermere. And there it is, rising directly out of a Bugaboo Glacier. There's a few out-of-province photos in the Milton Goddard collection as he tours other provincial parks around Western Canada to see how they operate. Here's a great shot of the Badlands of East Central Alberta inside Dinosaur Provincial Park, north of Brooks. And a great shot of Lake Louise and Mount Victoria. If you've been to the actual Lake Louise, you've seen this shot with your own eyes, but it looks very vivid in this slide. Coming back into BC, here's the brand new Fort Steele Bridge being built on Highway 93-95. This is the bridge that you drive across today as you travel between Cranbrook and Invermere. And of course, this is just outside Fort Steele, another ghost town that was taken over by the provincial government and turned into a provincial park. As you cross that bridge heading north, the first thing you see on your left is the giant water wheel. And here is the water wheel being constructed in 1968. A lot of historic buildings were brought from other towns into the new Fort Steele Heritage Town, or they were reconstructed, or they were some of the buildings that were still there, because when they took it over, there was, just like Barkerville, there were still people living in Fort Steele. It wasn't totally a ghost town yet. This is the restored Wassa Hotel, and of course here are the Clydesdales giving a tour of the Fort Steele Heritage Town grounds. This is an interesting shot from the collection. This is the opening of the Arrow Dam, which on its opening was renamed the Hugh Keenley Side Dam after the BC Hydro executive. And of course, Canadians will probably note the irony of the American flag flying over the dam. Yeah, look at the size of that children's band. This is a shot of the Duncan Dam under construction in 1965. The Duncan Dam is earth fill. So it's a very wide and not actually that tall by a local dam size structure. You can see the original course of the Duncan River off at where the spillway would eventually be built. But if you want to see the effects of what reservoirs can do to a landscape, this is the dam construction site in 1965. This is the same lookout that when you drive to Duncan Dam today at Meadow Creek, you look out over that same fence and you look over the lake. So here it is in 1965, and just keep your eye. The mountains don't move position, and the fence doesn't move position. So I'll switch from a Milton Goddard slide to a Hufty Hewitt slide because it just shows you. There it is, 2 years later. We'll just go back and we'll do another before. After. Very dramatic stuff. And of course, with Duncan Lake, very little clearing of the lake was done. They cleared it enough so that the viewpoint looked nice. But at the north end of the lake, it looked like this. This is 5 years after the completion of the reservoir, and you can see all of the dead trees. That was all marshland before. So the Creston Valley Wildlife Area that we now know and have driven by as we head into Creston, that was created in '74 to replace the wetlands that were lost on Duncan Lake in 1966. And that just gives you an idea of the water level fluctuation at that end of the reservoir. It's stunning, to say the least. I mentioned Sutherland Falls, Blanket Creek, and the community of 12 Mile. Blanket Creek Provincial Park sits on top of the old Domkey homestead, and there's still you can still see little bits and pieces of the building foundations and things when you visit Blanket Creek Provincial Park. That is how they got rid of the Domkey house. The house was built in the late 50s, mid 50s. So this would have been the last building and cleared, I guess you can tangentially associated with the clearing of the lake, even though the dam was already 3 years old by the time of this set of photos. These provincial parks that were created were part of using the new reservoir for recreation. And so this is, again, how the pretty ornate house was removed as part of the creation of that provincial park. Finally, we end with what seems like a morbid set of photos, but it's actually not. This is just tranquilizing bears within BC Park. We don't know what park this is, but it's a very interesting series of photos. As you can see, here's the bear tranquilized, being put into the bear cage. But even though dragging the bear, I guess that's the only way you can transport it, but it did wake up, and there's the bear, safe and sound, retreating into the woods. So the bear is all right. No animals were harmed in the making of this series of slides. A bit more upbeat. There's a porcupine hiding out under a fallen log. A nice little casual shot. And so that brings me to our next segment, keeping it casual. So just a fun little set of photos here before we get to our main event. This is a great shot of a parade float from 1952. So this is the 60th birthday parade of Nakusp Diamond Jubilee. So Ken Spears and Mrs. Flo Hurry. This is their float entry. An 1892 Saturday night. And yes, that is how many of your parents and grandparents had to take baths. Here's a casual shot of the Humphreys family of Nakusp in their garden, with Mr. Humphreys wearing a bucket on his head, and so is Mrs. Humphreys. I may or may not have been in this race. If it wasn't this year's race, it was the next year's race. This would be the 3 and 4 year olds running as part of the races in the park at July 1st. Should I out any people in this photo? Because I know 3 of them. But I'll just let you meditate on that and see if you recognize any of these folks. Not just in the race, but you can definitely pick out quite a number of people that are still here and prominent in our village today in the watching in the background. It's a pretty nice shot. Here's an early version of boogie boarding. This is in the 1910s, so motorboats are still pretty new. This is the 1910s, maybe early 1920s. But it would be a Hughes Brothers, Hughes Studio postcard. Aquaplaning. So we don't have water skiing yet, but we do have aquaplaning, which is literally just fashioning a plank with ropes attached to it, and then tying that plank to the back of a boat. That must have been extremely difficult to stand on and stay upright. This is at Edgewood. Apple Grove would be across the lake in the background. This is a shot from an Ichiro Shiino film that we made you might remember from our December show when it was Itchy Movie Night Part 1. And thanks to your intrepid help, we identified this little tyke as Jim Yamada. Another shot from that same fishing trip at Summit Lake. Here's another shot from the Itchy collection. Do not feed bears, folks. How Roy Churchill emerged with his hand still in one piece is amazing. But apparently this cub was a frequent visitor to the tugs at Vipond Creek. This is across the lake from Nakusp and just a bit south. So basically opposite Crescent Bay, thereabout. Just north of what we know of as the Bahamas today. A absolutely 100% not staged and totally impromptu shot of these 2 hikers who might be Forest Service personnel on the side of Saddle Mountain. Turn of the 60s. From the same film. Here they are looking back at the camera. It's always good to sneak a few Hans Lu shots into a slide because he took so many casual shots and so many amazing, stunning shots of mountain vistas in the Burton area, Arrow Park area. Because he was such an expert in the mountains, he was actually hired, the story behind this photo, to lead a Geological Survey of Canada party into the Valhalla Mountains. This is 20 years before Valhalla Park. So here he is catching a surveyor, looking through his notes with Snow Creek Valley in the background. There's Milton. With that hat, he would be about 6'2". This is the Arrow Lakes Historical Society, which would have been about 4 years old at the time of this photo in 1988. They are raising money by selling photographs to go towards the publication of their first full-length book, which would become Faces of the Past. And if anybody doesn't remember this location, that means you're probably 25 years old or younger. This is the old concession booth at what is now Helen Zelznick Park. Basically, in line with where the washrooms are at Helen Zelznick Park, that side of the field. And this building was built in the 1920s, and it stayed there until 2000. They tore it down right around 2000, 2001-ish. But that was our concession booth that we would patronize every July 1st. I actually just received, I'm guessing, at least 400 photos. Negative slides and prints. Oh, at least 400, maybe even 6 if you count the scrapbooks. That came from the Kinsman Club and Connect Clubs of the Cusp between the 50s and the 80s. And this is a Kinsman... so that was 3 days ago, and that's what I'll be doing for the next few weeks. Just processing all of those amazing photos. This is a Kinsman Club member at the Arrow, dressed as a penguin, riding a snowmobile that is going to be raffled off as part of the Arrow Lakes Winter Follies. Winter Follies were a thing that took place every February for a few years, late 60s, early 70s. It was basically July 1st for Valentine's Day. So you would actually have a big parade downtown, and then everybody would go to the ski hill and take part in the Winter Follies. This is a great shot. Marion Levesque of Argenta, whose father, Eric Levesque, was a native of Nakusp. This is Frontier Days, Kaslo, August 1939. And if that doesn't promote drinking, I don't know what does. 35 cents. Why walk around half dead when we can finish you off? The late Earl Moffat, on top of Sprout Lookout, above Arrowhead, 7,420 feet. This is the highest outhouse with the most scenic view. Yep. Speaking of outhouses, here's a, yes, remember when? For anybody up until the middle of the century, many people grew up going to bathroom in outhouses. In fact, there are still a few houses, if you know where to look, where people use outhouses in the Arrow Lakes Valley to this day. And notice the feet sticking out of the bot, just out from under the door. Remember when? And it's like, my mom actually used an outhouse until she moved to British Columbia. So, I mean, it wasn't that uncommon in 1958, because my mom was still using an outhouse in 1958. And you might recognize the Jup House in the background, which is still there today. That's the corner of Second and Second. Second and First. And there's the inside of the outhouse. And yes, it was Gay Bailey who was inside for that whole parade. Speaking of going to the bathroom, here is a funny postcard. Or a funny greeting card, Christmas card. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year if I have enough left. If you were walking around Nakusp today or driving around, you may have noticed for the first time in over a year actual soccer going on the high school field. Now that we have a little bit of outdoor sports again. So with that in mind, let's go back to school. Here's a rare shot. One of the 2, maybe 3 that I actually have, where you actually get to see the entire original Folk Year School. A very nice log cabin, one-room schoolhouse. I mentioned Sidmouth before. There were 3 schools at Sidmouth because it was so spread out. There was one at Hall's Landing, just next to the ferry. There was one across the way at Crawford Creek on the east side of the river. And then this is the Sproat School. The Sproat School would be close to where you cross Cranberry Creek today as you drive towards Revelstoke. It's sort of in that area of the river. And again, these are all one-room schoolhouses. So there's the Sproat School. There's the Hall's Landing School. 1911. So you're talking about one of the first schools on the Arrow Lakes. And again, a pretty humble schoolhouse compared even to the ones we saw in the other 2 photos. This is a great shot from the Despot family collection. This is Joe Despot of Sidmouth with his model of the Hall's Landing School, 1938. Here's a school that's seen better days. This is the abandoned Bellevue School. So Bellevue, for those who don't know, was a very, very small community across the river from Burton. This is where the Roberts family, the Marcoli family, came from. And for a short time, they actually had enough people for a school. And that is what was left of it in 1995. And speaking of the Roberts family, this photo actually came from Ernie Roberts. Here's the Arrowhead School in 1910s. And of course, Arrowhead was the largest town in between Revelstoke and the Cusp. A few hundred people in its heyday, almost 1,000. So it had a much larger school. Pretty much the same size as you would see in the Cusp at the same time. And there's the school children posing in front. It was the one building that was not demolished when the town site of Arrowhead was demolished prior to the flooding of the lake. So it actually stayed and was used as a summer camp for the Anglican Church. As you can see, Camp Arrowhead. And after that it was abandoned. Here's a view looking from the deck of the abandoned school. So after the summer camp had closed, I think the summer camp lasted until 84. This is February 88, looking out from Arrowhead, from the front of the school onto the lake. And you'll notice the lake, because it's low water in winter, that part of the old beach has been exposed. So nowadays the lake comes right up to the Arrowhead town site. There you can actually see where the Columbia River originally entered the lake. Now at high water, that's all water out there, but you can actually see where the Columbia River originally entered. And then the Thumb, Storm Point off at left, Shelter Bay, Bannock Point way off in the distance at right. Shortly thereafter, the school burned, sadly. So all that remains are the foundations of the school. And this is a Milton Parent photo. This is the remains of the Arrowhead School in August 2004. I showed this a couple of shows ago, but of course, like I said, this show was originally made in October, and I used it there too. So just for consistency's sake, and because it's just such an interesting contrast. This is the then brand new Lardo School, completed December 1929. But for the first 2 months of the year, the kids were still going to school in this, a literal tar paper shack. This is a nice shot of the Trout Lake School in 1914, and notable for its two steeples. Very ornate for its time, and a very cool looking building. You'd almost expect it to be a church with those types of steeples. Um, This is right before Trout Lake starts to decline. Once you start hitting the 20s, Trout Lake starts going downhill for a few decades before its recent resurgence that started in the 80s. So by the time you get to 30 years after this photo, here it is in 1946, and the vegetation is taking the school back, and eventually it disappears back into nature. The school that replaced it was this set of portables. This is the Trout Lake School as our president, Marilyn Taylor, saw it when she first arrived to teach there in the 82-83 school year. She actually had that sign that was painted by the children, and she had that for many years before donating it back to the community hall when we did a show there in 2017. And again, I can't wait until I can finally get back out on the road and take the shows directly to you, like we've done in Trout Lake and Burton and Edgewood and even Slocan City in New Denver. To transition into our virtual field trip, this is the Renata School, which was built in 1912. Again, another one-room school. Here it is as seen in the 1960s. Most of the buildings in Renata were not saved. Like many towns along the lakes, it was leveled when the dam came. But Ben Wiesner saved the school and towed it up to his property on the bench of land above the original town site. And there it is, as seen in June 2020, as we rode by on our ATVs. And ATVs, you say? Yes. Normally, at the end of each summer, Arrow Lakes Historical Society members travel somewhere in the West Kootenay on a field trip, so we can learn about other towns' history in our region, their heritage and their stories, and see their cool historic sites. And of course, obviously, last year we didn't get to do that, and who knows if we'll get to do that again this year. But I was fortunate enough to actually take a trip to Renata. And so, since we didn't get to do a proper field trip last year, I thought I'd take you on a virtual one now. So here is my trip to Renata last June, along the Columbia and Western Rail Trail, which begins on the west side of Castlegar, just past the Selgar Mill. And they've done a fantastic job of turning that entire stretch of rail trail, entire stretch of rail bed into a real rail trail with picnic facilities and interpretive signage, and yeah, it's quite a fun. You can go all the way to Grand Forks, and of course from there you can follow the Kettle Valley Rail Trail all the way into Kelowna and Penticton and off to Princeton, and so you can plan a whole vacation around it. So leaving Castlegar, you see the Labarth Tunnel. So the Columbia Western Rail Line was in use until the early 90s, which meant it outlasted the dam, and it outlasted the towns that it originally served out west of Castlegar. So the original rail bed at this point of the railway was flooded by the new dam, so they had to rebuild a new rail bed high up above this tunnel. Um, and there are some times of the year where you can actually take your boat up to it. As you can see where the we'll just move the mouse over here so you can actually see where the high water line is above this tunnel. Sometimes it's completely flooded, and sometimes the water is quite low. That gives you a shot of what the original rail bed at this location looked like at the turn of the 20th century. The railway was completed in the mid-1890s. And this is looking back from the rail bed towards the Keenleyside Dam that flooded parts of that original rail bed, and of course so much of the Arrow Lakes Valley. There's what it was, and here's how it looked like in 2020. This is a photo that I took close up back in 2009, where I actually boated down to it. GPS the entire lake. It was part of a mapping project. And of course, if you look way in the background, you can just see a little bit of smoke coming from the Celgar mill. So logs do have to make it through that dam, and so the dam has the capability to... it has locks so that boat traffic and logging traffic can pull logs through. And here are logs moving through the brand new at the time locks at the Keenleyside Dam in 1969. And this is out of BC Hydro magazine. And again, another shot of opening day at the Hugh Keenleyside Dam. This is from the Hufty Hewitt collection. And you can see the bus carrying tourists and attendees down to the celebrations. Again, Hugh Keenleyside Dam, very wide dam, very shallow dam. And now we go back a bit to the construction of the dam. This is a year earlier, May 1968. And then you go back even further to the very beginning of the construction. Further along, we get back to the original rail bed from the 1890s or so. And so I went along with members from the Nakusp ATV Club because they knew that, you know, this would be a good historic trip for me to go on. And this was one thing that even before I went on this trip, they told me, you have to come and see the rock work on these trestles. You know, the size of the size of the chunks of rock that they use to construct these trestles is amazing, especially given the technology of the time back then. And you know, it's all built by hand. And so there's an old trestle with a new railing, because of course, like I said, the whole rail bed has been properly upgraded for modern use. So you have brand new bridges like this. So here's the new bridge over the McCormick Creek Bridge. It's Graham Maxfield in the back, by the way. So you have all these cool bridges replacing the old original wooden trestles. And where there used to be actual rail stations, and of course their stations are long gone, so where there were stations, they've set up these picnic sites and picnic shelters with interpretive panels at them. This is Shields, which is about halfway between Castlegar and Renata, and Shields with a D is named after the Shiel family. That's two L's, no S, who many of you know from Edgewood. And so Shields, that's explained here, misnamed after preemptor Jim Shiel, as you can see in this panel here. So you learn so much just not just taking in the scenery and the sights, but you get to stop every so often and take in these great panels that they put together. And they were kind enough to use some of our photos from our Arrow Lakes Historical Society collection, some of these panels as well. So it's pretty cool to see some of our photos up there. There are numerous tunnels in between Castlegar and Christina Lake. And most of them are pretty short. One of them's pretty long, but most of them you can... they're just a couple 100 meters long, so it's pretty cool going through these tunnels on four-wheelers. And it's especially cool if you're going through it on your bike. But I mean, if you are going to bike or hike the rail trail, please make sure that you have a flashlight or a lantern of some kind, because it can get pretty dark inside the tunnels. Cedra asks, was Jim Shield Fred Shield's father or grandfather? Grandfather. You're talking way back at the turn of the century. So that's the tunnel at kilometer 23.6. So that gives you an idea of this is one of the shorter tunnels. Not a lot of room. Trains would have barely fit inside these tunnels. They only made them as big as they had to. I tried taking a photo of the actual big, long tunnel that is just past Brooklyn. But, I mean, it's over a kilometer long and it curves. You can't see anything in it, so there's no point in taking a picture. But it is quite a massive tunnel. So, to have constructed that back then would have been quite the project. And of course, that tunnel replaced a series of switchbacks that the railway had to do over Bulldog Mountain. The railway did not go to Renata. It crossed the mountain about 6 kilometers south of Renata, and people wanting to get out of Renata by any method other than boat had to hike up and over Bulldog Mountain to get to Tunnel Station and meet the train there. At Quakendall Station, which is, again, on the way to Brooklyn, there's this little, it was painted Tuscan red back in its day. There's a little shed embedded in the hillside, a little resting place. You can just see a little bench. It's amazing that this little shed is still there. You can see where an old stove used to be inside. It's not very big, just enough to sit on, warm yourself while waiting for the train. Give you an idea of the size. That's that'd be Keith Coates inside the shed, Court Dieterman on top. There it is, just a little tiny shed, but a nice little piece of history still there. You come to a pretty cool viewpoint high above the lake. This is where the rail bed leaves the mountainside along Lower Arrow Lake and then turns inland to start crossing into the Paulson. So you can see modern Deer Park across the way. And somebody actually asked on this trip, is that a golf course across just by how green and verdant it is. But no, that would be modern Deer Park, which is a pretty decent-sized little community, to be honest. That gives you an idea of what Deer Park used to look like. So all of those houses that you saw, those are up on the hillside above this flat area. And again, these are all orcharding communities along this part of the lake. Robson, Deer Park, and Renata. that was the Deer Park Resort snack bar and office as seen in the summer of 1965. This photo is taken by Charlie Watson, who is a reservoir manager for BC Hydro at the time. But yeah, the old Deer Park Resort. And also from BC Hydro negatives, this is the Deer Park Cemetery. So again, you notice orchards on one side, graves on the other. As with all cemeteries that were flooded or to be flooded, they were encased in rock and or cement to prevent graves from washing away. So this is Deer Park Cemetery being encased to protect the grave sites. Not only were cemeteries lost, but we lost so much of our indigenous heritage. These are pictographs at Cayuse Creek near Deer Park. And this would have been taken sometime in the early to mid 20th century. So you can see, pictographs of frogs. And again, we've lost so many of these, either because they were swallowed by the waters of the reservoir, or in some cases blasted away to make room for new alignment of highways. This is a neat little slide from the Dr. Maxfield collection, 1954. So this is actually taken from the Minto on the last run of the Minto. That gives you an idea of the wharf house at Deer Park, BC, and you'll notice the sign pointing towards the natural bridge across the lake above Renata. So this is the natural bridge at Renata. So they're talking about an archway eroded over thousands, if not millions of years, into the mountainside at Renata. And you actually see trees growing on top of the arch. So pretty cool. And you can still see it today when you look up at the mountain. So right before you would make the turn off the railway and begin your long hike down to Renata, right before, if you're on the rail trail, right before tunnel, right before you enter the big tunnel, you come across an interpretive panel telling you that you are near the site of the short-lived ghost town of Brooklyn. And this is what Brooklyn looked like for a few months in 1898. Notice they didn't even clear off the stumps. That's how quickly Brooklyn boomed as the railway came through. And brothels and saloons and stores and all sorts of businesses, but only for a few months, and then it petered away again. But here's a cool shot of the street plan of Brooklyn on Pup Creek, as it was called. Pup Creek flowed at Brooklyn. Dog Creek flowed into Renata. Like I said, Brooklyn came and went in a few months. So all that was left of it, really, for many decades, was the Schneider farm. A couple of buildings on the Schneider farm were originally from the Brooklyn town site. One building on the farm, I think, was the old butcher shed. But the Schneider family lived there for many decades after. I mean, it was, it's leveled and subdivided. That's where their farm was. So now the railway turns away for good from the lake, and you enter the Bulldog Tunnel. And this is where you come out at Tunnel Station. And like I said, the tunnel replaced a series of switchbacks that the train had to make. So it cut a lot of time. When you go through the tunnel, you can actually barely see, but there is water actively falling just all the condensation and moisture when you go through. So wear a hat, and it's very dark. Like I said, it's just over 1 kilometer long. It's really fun going through there. And the tunnel itself is not much bigger than the train was, as you can see from this shot in the 1960s. And if you go back 40 years even before that with the old train, it looks even small. It looks even smaller. That would not be fun to be traveling through that train and sticking your head out, for sure. You wouldn't want to do that. It would get, the ventilation would not be fantastic. Here's the Roan family on top of Bulldog Mountain. You can see the railway leaving the tunnel below them. And there's the actual tunnel station. So as you can see, there's 3 buildings there. What's left of tunnel station today? Not much, just a couple of foundations. This is what it looks like now. And of course, you have another picnic shelter, more interpretive panels. We went as far as tunnel station on this trip. We went back through the tunnel to the Brooklyn interpretive panel, and that's where we meet Bulldog Mountain Road, which is a logging road, and we went up the logging road a couple of kilometers to the old trail that Renata residents would use to hike up the side of Bulldog Mountain to get to the railway. You can imagine how fun that overgrown trail after all these years was on a 4-wheeler. I would not recommend it if you have a bad back. Coming back, going up the hill, it was exactly 1 hour to go the 6 kilometers. Exactly. Like, we left Renata at 3 o'clock on the dot, got back up to the rail trail at 4 o'clock on the dot. That's how steep it was. I actually had to get out and walk while my driver, so that my driver could actually drive up. And of course, there's active logging going on in there too, so it was actually a block cut for the first bit. Along the way, though, once you leave the block cut and you start descending, you start seeing old signs of civilization as you get closer to the Renata town site. This is a really cool shot of the remains of the Mountain Chief mine. And you'll notice the blue stains on the left side. That's copper. Copper, all those minerals leaching out of the side. So we have this shot, but then we also have this shot from the 60s. Here's what it looked like before. And you can actually pick out pieces. If I go back, if you look closely, you can actually see exactly where it was. So, of course, the trees hadn't fallen over, but blocking the entrance to the mine. But yeah, it's really cool. You can see the pieces of wood holding up the old shafts. Those shafts, the wood's rotted away, so the shaft's pretty empty. When you go in now, it looks like that. So you can actually walk in there a little bit. Yeah. Again, just show you a couple of, lots of dirt's fallen in it over the years and things, but so you can still access that. We saw this. I'd never heard of this brand of pop before, but this was called White Rock, and you can just make out. It's obviously a bilingual sign. You can just make out where it said raisin, so grape. So this is a grape soda, probably from the middle of the century. Just leaning up against the tree. There are a couple of other bottles there. Some of them were more recent, like 70s or 80s. There was actually a Royal Reserve whiskey bottle sort of half buried in the dirt there. Eventually, you do meet up with the actual Renata Road which comes up from Highway 3 in the Paulson. And you make your way through the modern cottages and houses and then down onto the flats. This is the site of the former Renata town site here. If you approach it by boat at high water, you'll be about halfway in the lake, and you'll notice all of a sudden the bottom of the lake suddenly pops up just a couple of meters below your boat, and then you just ride that flat water with the bottom of the lake constantly 7 meters below your boat for a while until you actually reach shore. So, as far as old remnants of the town site, not much. That's probably just someone's modern pontoon that floated away. So that's that with Renata Creek, Dog Creek floating, entering the lake there. Again, here's a famous shot I've used in a number of presentations. That's what the original Renata town site looked like just a couple of years before it was demolished. This is August 1965. So we are... so I'm taking that photo, if you can see my cursor, I'm taking that photo from right about here. Maybe even back here. We found this, speaking of old pontoon wharfs, we found this old pontoon boat right in the middle of the flats, just sitting there. This is a shot I took back in 2009 of Bulldog Mountain. And you'll notice at right, you see people's little makeshift pontoon docks and what have you. And you turn around to the right and you see this stairwell. And this is a cool photo for me because somebody in Cape Breton about 3 years ago actually found this photo that I had taken back in 2009, found it online, and wrote to me and said, I actually built that staircase with a friend of mine who's long since passed away back in the early 80s to get to his cabin. And can I have a copy? Well, absolutely. So we got a little personal story attached to this staircase. So even after the town site of Renata's gone, people are still there making their own history, their own heritage, and creating their own stories. And who knows what photos of that we'll be receiving 100 years from now. Here's the Renata Ferry, a great shot of the Renata Ferry, which operated, of course, until the end of the town site. Oddly enough, Renata didn't actually get a ferry until the mid-1950s. They simply used the Minto as their access before that. So it was only connected to the highway system for about 13 years, going from Renata to Broadwater, landing on the other side of the lake above Deer Park. And yeah, so as we leave Renata on the ferry, or arrive at Renata on the ferry, I guess, we leave the slideshow behind. And that's my presentation for tonight, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm happy that we were able to get this show properly up on YouTube in high def. So please, again, spread the link around. This will be up here forever now, and I thank you so much for joining me on our little virtual field trip of Renata, and for sticking around for all 90 minutes of our show. And we'll see you next time, everyone. Until then, have a good one.